For my sister's wedding, she gave me one instruction: just smile and keep quiet. She called my life's work a charity case, a joke. She didn't know I was listening. She didn't know I saw the truth hidden in the shipping logs. And she had no idea that her perfect, beautiful wedding was about to become a federal crime scene because of me. Where are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in the quiet strength it takes to stand up for what's right, please consider subscribing. We're grateful you're here. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, thick and heavy enough to anchor a small boat. It wasn't paper, not really. It was a slab of ivory cardstock entombed in velvet, the kind of thing that costs more than a week's worth of antibiotics in the places I usually worked. My sister's name, Chloe, was scripted across the front in gold leaf intertwined with the name of a man I'd never met, a man whose family owned a shipping empire. I ran my thumb over the gilded letters, the texture feeling foreign and slick against my skin. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons to a world I had intentionally left behind, a world of polished surfaces and polite lies. My world was different. It was dust and sweat, the rumble of a C-130's cargo bay, the clipped, urgent chatter over a satellite radio. My world was about getting things done when everything was falling apart. Just last month, I was coordinating a supply drop over a flooded delta in Southeast Asia. We had 12 hours to get 40 tons of medical supplies and clean water to a village cut off by the monsoon. The landing strip was washed out, the roads were gone, and the local government's logistics were in chaos. While my team was loading pallets under the punishing sun, I was on a crackling line with an air traffic controller in a different time zone, rerouting a flight path around a brewing storm, my boots sinking into the mud. We got it done. No one threw a party. No one sent a velvet invitation. Our reward was a grainy satellite photo of a child drinking clean water from a cup. That was enough. Now, holding this piece of opulent cardboard, I couldn't help but see the contrast. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a merger. Chloe was merging with the Devereaux family, a name synonymous with old money and maritime power. She was getting everything she ever wanted: the status, the security, the spectacle. And I was genuinely happy for her. Or at least I tried to be. But a part of me, the part forged in the deserts of Iraq and the sweltering humidity of disaster zones, knew that things that look this perfect on the surface often hide the deepest cracks. I propped the invitation up on my small kitchen table, where it looked absurdly out of place next to my worn field maps and a half-empty mug of black coffee. It was a beautiful object, a testament to a life lived without compromise. But as I looked at it, a memory surfaced unbidden. It was from years ago, during one of my brief leaves from deployment. We were at a family dinner, and I was trying to explain the complexity of setting up a supply chain in a conflict zone. Chloe had listened with a patient, bored smile before turning to our mother and saying, "It's so sweet that Maya thinks her little projects are so important. It's like a more exciting version of the Peace Corps, isn't it?" She hadn't meant it to be cruel. Not exactly. In her world, importance was measured in stock prices, gala attendance, and the carat weight of a diamond. My work, quiet and often invisible, simply didn't register. I was the sister who played in the dirt, the one who chose service over status. The velvet invitation on my table wasn't just asking for my presence. It was a reminder of that distance, a gorge between our two lives that had grown wider with every year. And I had a sinking feeling that this wedding wasn't going to bridge it. It was going to carve it into stone. A few days later, my phone buzzed with Chloe's name. I let it ring twice before answering, taking a steadying breath. With Chloe, you always needed to be prepared. "Maya, darling." Her voice chirped a little too bright, a little too polished. "Did you get our little invitation?" It would have been hard to miss Chloe. It practically has its own gravitational pull. I tried to keep my tone light, a skill I wasn't nearly as good at as logistics. She laughed, a tinkling sound like ice in a crystal glass. "Good. Now about the wedding. There are a few things. I'm sending you the itinerary, of course. Rehearsal dinner is Friday night at the Carlisle. Black tie. Please, Maya, for me. Black tie." I made a non-committal noise. My idea of black tie was my cleanest pair of combat boots and a jacket that didn't have mud on it. And one more thing, she continued, her voice dropping into that sweet, condescending tone she reserved just for me. When you're talking to guests, especially any of Harrison's family or business partners, maybe steer clear of the war stories. You know, the refugee camps, the earthquakes. It can be such a downer for people who are just trying to celebrate. It makes them uncomfortable. I gripped the phone a little tighter. The people she was referring to were the ones whose biggest disaster was a dip in the stock market. The uncomfortable stories she wanted me to avoid were the literal life and death struggles of human beings my team and I work to alleviate. I just want everyone to have a good time, she added, as if that explained everything. And I want them to see you well as my sister, not as some kind of relief worker. The word hung in the air between us. Relief worker. She said it the way someone might say janitor or clerk, not with outright disgust, but with a clear, unmistakable sense of pity. The implication was clear. My life's work, the skills I had honed under fire, the very core of who I was something to be managed, something to be sanitized for her new powerful family. This wasn't just a sisterly request to be on my best behavior. I recognized the tactic instantly. It was a preemptive strike. In the military, we called it shaping the battlefield. You define the terrain and discredit potential threats before the engagement even begins. Chloe was subtly painting me as a well-meaning but naive outsider, a bleeding heart who didn't understand how the real world worked. It was a way to ensure that if I saw anything or said anything that didn't fit her perfect narrative, my words would have no weight. They would be dismissed as the ramblings of the emotional, out-of-touch sister. "I'll be on my best behavior, Chloe," I said finally, my voice carefully neutral. "Wonderful." She sighed, all relief and sunshine again. "I knew you'd understand. This is just so important to me, to us. See you in New York." She hung up, leaving a sterile silence in her wake. I stood in my quiet apartment, the city lights beginning to blur outside my window. She wasn't just asking me to be quiet. She was telling me who I was allowed to be in her world. And it was a warning. A velvet-wrapped warning that told me to stay in my lane, to smile, and to not look too closely at the carefully constructed world she was marrying into. But looking closely was what I did best. It was how I kept people alive. The conversation with Chloe left a sour taste in my mouth. It was a feeling I knew well, the quiet friction of being underestimated. I tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the upcoming quarterly review for True North Aid. My job was to ensure our operations were not just effective, but ruthlessly efficient. Every dollar saved, every hour cut from a delivery schedule could mean another life saved. My desk was covered in spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and satellite maps, a language I understood far better than small talk at a cocktail party. I was cross-referencing our active supply chains for the Horn of Africa initiative, a project we were immensely proud of. We had established a secure route to deliver emergency medical supplies, bypassing regions known for instability and corruption. It was a clean, transparent pipeline. Or so I thought. As I reconciled the latest transport logs against our internal records, my eyes caught something. A single line item. An anomaly so small most people would have scrolled right past it. Container TN729. A standard 40-foot unit filled with IV kits and portable water purifiers. According to our manifest, it was scheduled to ship directly from our warehouse in Virginia to Port of Djibouti. But the third-party logistics report showed a different story. The container had been inexplicably rerouted. It had made an unscheduled 24-hour stop at a small private terminal in Wilmington, Delaware. A terminal owned and operated exclusively by Devereaux Maritime, Chloe's fiancé's family. My fingers stilled on the keyboard. It made no sense. A detour like that wasn't just inefficient. It was a breach of protocol. It added cost time and, most importantly, risk. Our entire model was built on minimizing handoffs to prevent tampering or theft. Why would a container of humanitarian aid need to make a pit stop at the private port of a commercial shipping giant? I pulled up the detailed tracking data. The container had been offloaded, held in a secure Devereaux facility, and then reloaded onto a different vessel bound for the same destination. It was all documented, all technically above board. It looked like a simple logistical shuffle. But my instincts honed by years of sniffing out trouble in places where trouble was the native language screamed that this was wrong. You don't move a sealed container of medicine to a private facility for no reason. You just don't. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet anymore. This was a crack in the foundation. A small hairline fracture, but the kind that could bring the whole structure down if you ignored it. Was it a mistake? A simple clerical error in a vast, complicated system? It was possible. Or was it something else? I thought back to Chloe's voice on the phone, her casual dismissal of my work, her warning to not make her guests uncomfortable. It felt different now. Less like social anxiety, and more like a deliberate attempt to keep me at a distance, to keep my inquisitive nature from wandering too close to their polished world. I saved a copy of this manifest in the logistics report to a secure encrypted drive. I didn't know what I was looking at yet. It was just a question mark. A single, oddly shaped piece in a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving. But I knew one thing for sure. My trip to New York for my sister's wedding had just changed. It was no longer just a family obligation. It was now a mission. The flight to New York felt different this time. I wasn't just a reluctant wedding guest anymore. I was carrying a secret, a question mark stored on an encrypted drive in my carry-on. The city greeted me with its usual symphony of sirens and hurried footsteps a world away from the quiet focus of my office. I checked into my hotel, a sleek, impersonal tower of glass and steel that Chloe had booked, and tried to push the shipping manifest from my mind. Tonight, I had to play the part she had assigned me. I arrived at the Carlisle exactly on time. Punctuality is a habit forged in the military that you never quite lose. The hotel lobby was a hushed cathedral of wealth, all marble floors and gilded ceilings. I found the private dining room, and the moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations. And then I saw her, Chloe. She was a vision in a silk dress the color of champagne gliding through the room like she was born to it. She was standing with a group of older, impeccably dressed people laughing at something one of them said. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. She excused herself and drifted toward me, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "Maya, you made it," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Her hug was brief, all bone and fabric, with no real warmth behind it. "I want you to meet Harrison's parents." She led me toward this group she had just left. The man was tall and silver-haired with the kind of confident posture that comes from a lifetime of being in charge. The woman beside him was draped in diamonds that glittered under the soft lights. They were the king and queen of this opulent kingdom. "Mom, Dad, this is my sister, Maya," Chloe announced. Her tone was bright, but I caught the subtle undertone, the same one from our phone call. It was a silent plea for me to behave, to not disrupt the perfect image she was projecting. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux," I said, extending a hand. Mr. Devereaux's handshake was firm, his eyes assessing me with a cool, detached curiosity. "Chloe tells us you work for a charity," he said. "A noble pursuit." Before I could respond, Chloe jumped in, her voice light and airy. "Yes, she's our family's saint. Always off in some dusty corner of the world helping people. We're so proud of her, even if we don't understand half of what she does." I smiled a tight, practiced expression. The words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they landed like tiny, sharp pebbles. She was framing me just as I had predicted. She was casting me as the simple, good-hearted, but ultimately naive sister. The one who understood charity, but not power. The one who understood mud and dust, but not the intricate dance of wealth and influence happening in this room. As she steered me away to introduce me to a cousin, she leaned in, her voice a low whisper against my ear. "See, simple. Just smile, look pretty, and let me do the talking. You look great, by the way. Very simple. It's perfect." I just nodded. I let her lead me through the room, a silent player in her carefully staged production. But as I smiled and shook hands, my mind wasn't on the small talk. It was on container TN-729. It was on a 24-hour stop in a private port. And it was on the man whose hand I had just shaken, the patriarch of the Devereaux Maritime Empire. I was in the lion's den now, and Chloe had just tried to convince the lion that I was nothing more than a harmless lamb. The rehearsal dinner was an exercise in controlled observation. I moved through the evening with a quiet purpose, nursing a single glass of sparkling water, my senses on high alert. I watched the interactions, the subtle shifts in power, the alliances forged and reinforced over plates of food I couldn't taste. I was a ghost at the feast present, but unseen, gathering data just as I had done in countless hostile environments before. The only difference was that here the weapons were words and the armor was tailored silk. As the main course was cleared, Chloe's soon-to-be father-in-law, Mr. Devereaux, stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The low hum of conversation faded into an expectant silence. He was a natural commander, a man accustomed to holding a room in the palm of his hand. He gave a warm, charming speech about the union of two great families, about destiny, about the bright future that lay ahead for his son Harrison and his beautiful bride-to-be. It was polished perfect and utterly devoid of genuine emotion. Then he turned his gaze down the long, flower-laden table, his eyes landing on Chloe. And now I'd like to invite the maid of honor Maya to say a few words. Chloe, my dear, I believe your sister has prepared something. A flicker of panic crossed Chloe's face before she masked it with a brilliant smile. Of course. Maya. I hadn't prepared a speech. Chloe had never asked me to. It was another small, deliberate omission, a way to keep me on the sidelines. But I was never one to be caught unprepared. I stood up slowly, the collective gaze of the room feeling like a physical weight. I could feel Chloe's eyes on me, silently pleading, silently warning. I kept it brief. I spoke of sisterhood, of shared memories from a childhood that felt a lifetime away. I told a short, harmless anecdote about us building a fort out of blankets in our living room, a story so safe and generic it couldn't possibly offend anyone. I ended by wishing them a lifetime of happiness. It was simple, elegant, and completely impersonal. I could feel the room relax. I had played my part. I was the harmless, sentimental sister. But as I sat down, Chloe stood up, her smile radiant, her eyes glittering with something that looked like triumph. Thank you, Maya, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. That was so sweet. And now, if I may, I'd like to propose a toast of my own. She raised her glass, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests before finally settling on me. To my big sister, Maya. The room waited. I could feel my muscles tense. She's a true inspiration, Chloe continued, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. While most of us are here worrying about things like floral arrangements and stock portfolios, she dedicates her entire life to helping others in the most desperate corners of the world. She reminds us that even when you have nothing, you can still have a purpose. So let's raise a glass to her, to my sister who proves that you don't need a fancy title or a big bank account to make a difference. We're so proud of the little world you've built for yourself. A wave of polite, appreciative murmurs went through the room. Guests smiled at me, their faces full of a sort of benign admiration. They thought it was a beautiful tribute, a loving acknowledgement from one sister to another. But I heard the words for what they were. It was the final perfect nail in the coffin of my credibility. With one toast, she had masterfully framed me as a poor, noble, but ultimately powerless creature. A saintly figure, but one who operated in a little world completely separate from their world of power and consequence. She had dismissed my life's work as a quaint hobby, and in doing so had dismissed me. The wound wasn't just deep, it was precise. It was a kill shot delivered with a smile right in front of everyone who mattered. And it was the last piece of evidence I needed. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. I endured the rest of the dinner in a state of cold, crystalline clarity. Chloe's toast hadn't just been an insult. It was a strategic move, and the precision of it told me everything I needed to know. The warmth of the room felt artificial, the laughter hollow. I was no longer just an observer. I was a target. After the dessert plates were cleared, I retreated to the hotel bar to escape the suffocating politeness of the dining room. I just needed a quiet corner and a few minutes to recalibrate. As I sat down, my phone buzzed with the preliminary guest list and seating chart for the wedding ceremony, an email Chloe had likely scheduled to send hours ago. I opened the file out of habit, my eyes scanning the names with the same methodical attention I'd give a pre-mission briefing. Most of the names were meaningless to me, a long list of Devereaux Associates society friends and distant relatives. But then my eyes froze on a single entry at table 3, the head table for the groom's most distinguished guests. General Thompson, head of U.S. Transportation Command. The name hit me with the force of an electric shock. I leaned back, my mind racing. I knew Chloe's wedding would have powerful guests, but I hadn't expected him. General Marcus Thompson wasn't just a high-ranking officer. He was a legend in the world of military logistics. And I knew him. A memory sharp and vivid cut through the fog of the evening. I was back in a dusty, sun-baked command tent on the outskirts of Fallujah. I was a young captain then, barely 30 years old, and my team had just executed what everyone said was impossible. We had established and secured a new supply corridor through hostile territory in under 48 hours, resupplying 3 forward operating bases that were about to run dry. General Thompson, who was on a command tour of the region, had flown in specifically to review our operation. I remember standing before him covered in dust, my uniform smelling of sweat and diesel fumes as I walked him through the color-coded maps and contingency plans I had drawn up on a portable whiteboard. He listened intently, his gaze missing nothing. When I was finished, he didn't offer empty praise. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Captain Garrison, I've seen colonels with 20 years of experience who couldn't pull this off. You don't just move supplies. You understand the geometry of a battlefield. That is a rare and dangerous gift." He had seen me, not as a woman in uniform, not as a junior officer, but as a strategist. He understood my work on a level that my own sister never could and never would. He was a man who respected evidence results and competence above all else. He was a man who would listen. A slow, cold sense of purpose began to settle over me. The game had just changed. I was no longer an isolated, discredited voice. There was now a figure on the board who knew my true capabilities. General Thompson wasn't just a guest at this wedding. He was an opportunity. He was my audience. And suddenly, the carefully constructed narrative Chloe had built around me, the image of the simple, naive do-gooder, felt incredibly fragile. Because there was one person in that wedding hall who knew it was a lie. Back in the sterile silence of my hotel room, the city's distant hum felt like a countdown timer. The knowledge that General Thompson would be at the wedding had shifted my entire perspective. I was no longer just fumbling in the dark. I had a potential endpoint, a specific person to whom the truth might matter. But I couldn't approach a 4-star general with just a hunch and a bad feeling. I needed more than a single anomalous shipping manifest. I needed a pattern. I sat down at the small desk, the city lights painting stripes across the wall. I pulled out my laptop, a hardened, unassuming device that looked like any other business machine, but was loaded with security protocols that would make a government agency proud. I connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi through a multi-layered VPN, a digital ghost slipping into the global network unseen. It was time to go to work. My first target was Devereaux Maritime. I didn't try to hack them. That was loud, clumsy, and unnecessary. Instead, I started from the outside using publicly available maritime tracking databases, international shipping registries, and corporate filings. My work at True North Aid had made me an expert at navigating these labyrinthine systems. I knew how to read the digital breadcrumbs that every vessel, every container, and every corporation leaves in its wake. For hours, I did nothing but collate data. I tracked the movements of Devereaux vessels over the past 18 months. I cross-referenced their port calls with their declared cargo types. I built a map not of the sea, but of their behavior. At first, it all looked normal. They were a massive, efficient, and profitable enterprise. But I wasn't looking for what was normal. I was looking for the quiet exceptions, the tiny deviations that signal a deeper current. And then I found it. It started with one vessel, the St. Elias. On paper, it was a bulk carrier running a profitable route between South America and Europe. But its movements were strange. It made frequent, unscheduled stops at ports in West Africa ports that were notorious hotspots for arms trafficking and smuggling. These stops were never long, just a few hours, long enough to take on an undeclared passenger or an undeclared container. I dug deeper, pulling the records for other Devereaux ships. A pattern began to emerge, faint at first, then undeniable. It was a shadow network operating in parallel with their legitimate business. While most of their fleet followed predictable, profitable routes, a handful of specific ships behaved erratically. These ships frequently intersected with the routes of humanitarian aid shipments, not just from my NGO, but from several others. They would cross paths in the open ocean, or make brief overlapping port calls in loosely regulated harbors. It was a sophisticated shell game played out on a global scale. A container of medical supplies would leave a port. A Devereaux vessel would be nearby. A brief logistical shuffle would occur, and somewhere along the line something changed. Something was added, or something was swapped. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling certainty. The rerouted container TN-729 wasn't an anomaly. It was a single observable data point in a much larger, more sinister operation. Devereaux Maritime wasn't just a shipping company. They were using the unimpeachable cover of humanitarian aid, the very work I dedicated my life to, as a cloak for something else. I stared at the network map I had created on my screen. The glowing lines connected ports and vessels, a web of deceit spanning continents. My sister wasn't just marrying into a wealthy family, she was marrying into a criminal enterprise. And the cold, calculated way she had tried to discredit me suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't just about social embarrassment. It was about protecting a secret worth millions, a secret she now had to know I was getting dangerously close to. The network map on my screen was a damning indictment, a web of deceit woven across the world's oceans. But it was still just data, lines on a screen. I had a pattern of movement, but I didn't know the cargo. I didn't know what was being added or swapped in those dark private ports. To get that information, I needed more than just public records. I needed eyes on the inside. I needed someone I could trust implicitly. There was only one person who fit that description. His name was Ben Carter. He had been my sergeant in Iraq, a quiet, unlappable man who could read a situation faster than anyone I'd ever met. After his tour, he'd taken his skills to the private sector and now worked for a high-level maritime intelligence firm in London, a company that specialized in tracking high-risk cargo for insurance syndicates. Ben owed me nothing, but we shared something more valuable than debt, a mutual unspoken respect forged under fire. We had kept each other alive. I looked at the clock. It was just after 2 a.m. in New York, which meant it was a more reasonable 7 a.m. in London. I found his secure number in my encrypted contacts and made the call. It felt like a lifetime since we had last spoken, but when he answered on the second ring, his voice was exactly the same. Calm, steady, and missing nothing. Maya, it's been a while. You in some kind of trouble? Not exactly, Ben. I have a question, completely off the record. It involves a few container serial numbers and some vessel call signs. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask who they belonged to. That was the beauty of working with professionals like Ben. They understood that sometimes the less you knew, the better. Go ahead, he said simply. I read him the serial numbers of 3 containers, including TN-729, and the names of the 5 Devereaux vessels I had flagged for my research. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard on his end, the sound of a craftsman at work. For a full minute, there was only silence on the line. I waited. All right, he said finally, his voice now a little tighter, a little more focused. I'm looking at the logs. These containers all started as standard humanitarian shipments, medicine food tents, all properly declared. What happened after they were offloaded, I asked, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. That's where it gets interesting. According to the internal port records I can access, they were never opened. They were just reweighed, before and after being held in the Devereaux facility. Reweighed why? To adjust the manifest for billing officially. But the numbers are wrong, Maya. They're way off. He paused again, and I could practically feel him leaning closer to his screen. Wait a minute. I'm cross-referencing the weight discrepancies with a proprietary database we use. It flags materials based on density and volume calculations. This is hell. What is it, Ben? What are they loading? His voice dropped to a near whisper, stripped of all its earlier calm. Maya, this is big. The weight and density profiles added to these containers don't match spare parts or commercial goods. They match one thing almost perfectly: high-grade military spec electronics, specifically guidance systems and encrypted communications hardware, the kind of stuff that is heavily restricted, the kind of stuff you don't put on a commercial vessel without a mountain of permits, or a very good reason to hide it. The silence on my end was absolute. It wasn't just a crime, it was a threat to national security, and they were using my NGO, my work, my reputation as their shield. Ben, I said, my voice steady despite the ice forming in my veins, I need a copy of everything you just found. You got it, he replied without hesitation. But Maya, be careful. People who move this kind of hardware don't like witnesses. I know, Ben. I know. I hung up the phone, the quiet of the hotel room pressing in on me. The puzzle wasn't just about money or smuggling anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. And the wedding tomorrow wasn't just a wedding. It was a transaction, a celebration of a partnership built on a foundation of treason. Ben's words echoed in the silent room long after the call ended. Guidance systems, encrypted communications hardware. This was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, cold and hard and terrifying. The data packet he sent over arrived moments later, a dense file filled with shipping logs, weight analyses, and cross-referenced cargo profiles. It was a meticulously detailed indictment, all the proof I needed to confirm my worst fears. I spent the next hour absorbing the information, letting the reality of it sink in. The Devereaux family wasn't just supplementing their income with a little side hustle. They were operating a shadow pipeline using the unimpeachable cover of humanitarian aid to smuggle sophisticated military technology. They were merchants of chaos, hiding in plain sight, draped in the respectability of old money and philanthropy. Every container of medicine or food they helped deliver was a Trojan horse for something far more sinister. My mind raced, connecting the dots with a sickening clarity. The strange rerouting of our container, the erratic movements of their fleet, the choice of ports known for illicit trade, and Chloe's wedding to their son, a strategic alliance to solidify their empire and expand their network. It all fit together, a perfectly constructed machine of greed and betrayal. As I stared at the screen, a new wave of understanding washed over me, colder and more personal than anything before. It was about Chloe, her constant casual dismissal of my work, her little jokes about my charity projects, her toast at the dinner painting me as a naive saint. It wasn't just condescension born from a different worldview. It was a calculated, deliberate strategy. She had to have known. Maybe not the fine details, not the specifics of the hardware, but she had to have known that the family business wasn't clean. And she knew that I, with my background in military logistics and my obsessive attention to detail, was the single biggest threat to their secret. My very existence was a risk to her perfect gilded future. Her campaign to discredit me, to paint me as a harmless, emotional woman who lived in a little world, was an act of self-preservation. She was building a firewall around herself, ensuring that if I ever got close to the truth, no one would believe me. Who would listen to the poor, idealistic sister when she made wild accusations against one of the country's most powerful families? It was brilliant, it was vicious, and it was working. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This was no longer just about uncovering a crime. It was about untangling a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow. The sister I had grown up with, the girl I had built blanket forts with, had looked at my life's work, my entire identity, and had seen nothing but a tool to be used and a threat to be neutralized. A quiet rage began to burn where the shock had been. It wasn't a hot, reckless anger, but a cold, focused fury. It was the same feeling I'd had in the desert when a mission went wrong, when a trusted local contact turned out to be an informant. It was the feeling of seeing the truth clearly, no matter how ugly it was. I closed the file and powered down my laptop. The evidence was secure. The picture was complete. I now knew what they were doing, and I knew why my own sister had tried so hard to silence me before I even spoke. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. The wedding was in less than 12 hours. The stage was set, the guests were arriving, and General Thompson would be there. I had one chance to make the truth heard, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to take it. Just as I was about to shut down my system for the night, a final message from Ben Carter popped up. It was unexpected. Our transaction was complete, and for his own security, I didn't expect to hear from him again. The message was simple. One more thing I found, you should see this. Attached was a single heavily encrypted audio file. My heart hammered against my ribs. Audio was different. It wasn't data. It was human. It was undeniable. I ran the file through 3 separate decryption protocols before it finally opened. The quality was poor, salvaged from a compromised server's background recordings, but the voices were clear enough. The first voice was Mr. Devereaux, the patriarch. His tone was the same as it had been at the dinner. Smooth, confident, accustomed to power. "The route is getting hot," he said. "That last shipment through the Horn of Africa raised a flag in the system. Minor, but we need a new corridor, something clean, something no one would ever think to look at." There was a pause, and then a second voice answered. A voice I knew better than my own. A voice that had shared secrets with me late at night when we were children. It was Chloe. "I can help with that," she said, her tone stripped of the sweetness she used in public. It was cold, businesslike, and sharp as glass. "My sister's organization, True North, they just pioneered a new route. It's for emergency medical relief. It's fast-tracked through customs. No one touches it. They see the NGO seal, and they wave it through." Mr. Devereaux's voice held a note of caution. "And your sister? Is she a problem?" The laugh Chloe gave was short and devoid of humor. "Maya, please, she's a bleeding heart in hiking boots. She thinks she's saving the world, but she has no idea how it actually works. She tells me everything, their schedules, their routes, their security gaps. She thinks she's just venting about her day. She's so predictable. I've been managing her for years. Leave her to me. She won't see a thing." Yeah. The recording ended. I sat there frozen in my chair, the silence of the hotel room roaring in my ears. The blood drained from my face. It felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me in a free fall. This wasn't just complicity. This wasn't just knowing about the family business and looking the other way. This was active, malicious, and intimate betrayal. She had taken our relationship, the trust between sisters, the very conversations we'd had, and she had weaponized them. Every time I had called her tired and frustrated after a long week and told her about the challenges of my work, I wasn't talking to my sister. I was giving a status report to the enemy. The image of her at the dinner toasting to my little world flashed in my mind. It wasn't just a put-down, it was a statement of victory. She was celebrating her own cleverness, her ability to manipulate and control the one person who could expose her. The quiet rage I had felt before now solidified into something else entirely. It became a core of ice. The grief, the shock, the hurt. It was all still there, but it was now encased in a layer of cold, absolute resolve. She hadn't just underestimated my intelligence. She had underestimated my strength. She thought I was a predictable problem to be managed. She had no idea that I was a strategist. And she had just become my mission. I didn't sleep. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I spent the remaining hours before dawn in quiet, methodical preparation. The shock and the grief from Chloe's betrayal had receded, leaving behind a state of hyper-focused calm. The emotional storm had passed. Now it was time to execute the mission. I laid out my outfit for the day not like a wedding guest, but like a soldier preparing her gear. The dress was simple, a deep navy blue sheath. Elegant, but forgettable. It was chosen for its clean lines and lack of ornamentation, nothing that would draw unnecessary attention. My shoes were low heels, comfortable and stable, designed for movement, not for show. I tied my hair back in a neat low bun. Every choice was deliberate, designed to project an image of quiet professionalism to make me fade into the background. But there was one final piece. I opened a small, worn leather pouch I carried in my travel bag. Inside was a single object I had kept from my time in the service. It wasn't a medal or a commendation. It was a challenge coin, a plain, heavy brass disc given to me by my unit after a particularly difficult operation. On one side was our unit's insignia. On the other, a single engraved word, Veritas, truth. I held it in my palm, the metal cool and solid against my skin. It was a grounding object, a reminder of the code I had lived by, a reminder that the truth has its own weight, its own power, regardless of who chooses to believe it. I slipped it into the small hidden pocket of my dress. It was my armor. As the morning light began to filter through the window, I did a final mental review of my plan. It was simple. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic accusations. That was Chloe's style, not mine. My power didn't lie in loud proclamations. It lay in presenting irrefutable facts to the right person at the right time. My target was General Thompson. The venue was the wedding reception. The weapon was a single encrypted flash drive currently secured in my hotel room safe. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same one who had arrived in New York 2 days ago. The hurt was still there, etched in the lines around my eyes, but it was overshadowed by a quiet, unshakable resolve. There was no anger on my face, no thirst for revenge. There was only the calm, steady gaze of a professional with a job to do. Chloe had called this her perfect day, the culmination of all her ambitions. She had meticulously planned every detail, curated every guest, and managed every potential threat, especially me. She thought she had built an impenetrable fortress of wealth and influence. But she had made one critical error. She had invited me inside, and she had mistaken my silence for submission. Today, she was going to learn the difference. The wedding reception was even more extravagant than I had imagined. It was held in a grand ballroom overlooking Central Park, a space designed to communicate power and effortless grace. Thousands of white roses hung in fragrant garlands from the ceiling, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Every detail was flawless, a perfect stage for a perfect lie. I found my assigned table and sat down, my back straight, my posture calm. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the head table where Chloe sat radiant in her designer gown, laughing with her new husband. She looked every bit the triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She occasionally glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd. And when they passed over me, she gave a small dismissive nod as if ticking a box. The simple sister is here and behaving. The thought sent a jolt of cold resolve through me. I didn't mingle, I didn't make small talk. I simply watched. I tracked the movements of the key players as if they were assets on a battlefield. Mr. Devereaux, the patriarch, moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, his smile never quite reaching his cold, calculating eyes. His son, the groom, stood proudly by Chloe's side, blissfully unaware or willfully ignorant of the criminal enterprise that funded this spectacle. And then I saw him, General Thompson. He was exactly as I remembered him from the command tent in Iraq, just in a dress uniform instead of desert fatigues. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority that made him stand out even in this room of powerful men. He was seated at table 3, just as the chart had indicated, deep in a polite but formal conversation with a senator. My plan depended on a single, crucial element: timing. I couldn't just walk up to a 4-star general in the middle of a wedding reception. I needed a moment in opening when he was not engaged, when an interruption would seem natural, or at least not entirely out of place. I watched him for nearly an hour, tracking his patterns, waiting for the right opportunity. The moment came during the transition between the main course and the cake cutting. The music-swelled guests began to move around more freely, and the formal structure of the evening loosened slightly. General Thompson had just finished his conversation with the senator and was standing alone for a moment, looking out the large window at the park below. It was now or never. I stood up, my heart a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. The brass coin in my pocket felt heavy, a solid point of focus in a sea of glittering distractions. As I began to walk toward him, I could feel Chloe's eyes on my back. I didn't look at her. My focus was singular. My target was in sight. The stage was set. The audience was in place. And the truth was waiting in the wings, ready for its cue. I moved across the marble floor with a quiet, deliberate pace. Each step was measured. I was not a guest approaching a dignitary. I was an operator approaching a target. The noise of the reception seemed to fade into a low, distant hum. My entire world narrowed to the space between me and the man standing by the window. General Thompson turned slightly as I drew near his eyes, registering my approach, with a flicker of polite curiosity. He likely assumed I was a staff member or a distant relative wanting to say hello. His expression was neutral professional. He didn't recognize me, not yet. Not in this context, in this dress, so far removed from the dust and chaos of Iraq. I stopped a respectful distance away. I didn't offer a handshake. I didn't introduce myself. I simply met his gaze and held it. General Thompson. I said, my voice low and steady, just loud enough for him to hear over the string quartet. Yes. His response was crisp, his attention now fully on me. I took a half step closer, creating a small private bubble between us. I knew I had only seconds before someone, likely Chloe or one of the Devereaux, would notice and intervene. I had to make every word count. I didn't speak in English. I chose a language I knew he was fluent in, a language of precision and diplomacy, a language that would immediately signal this was not a social call. I switched to French. My apology for the interruption, General. His eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. The shift in language had worked. It was a key turning a lock. It told him this was something different, something serious. His posture changed subtly, becoming less relaxed, more attentive. I continued, my voice calm, my words carefully chosen. I have an urgent logistical matter to report. It concerns maritime security and the integrity of humanitarian aid channels. His gaze sharpened, a flicker of recognition dawning in his eyes. He was connecting the dots. A woman speaking to him in fluent French about military logistics at a high society wedding. He was searching his memory, pulling a file from a dusty cabinet. I let the silence hang for a beat, giving him a moment to make the connection. And then I delivered the payload. The 5 words that would detonate the entire evening. The containers have been swapped. Les conteneurs ont été échangés. The words hung in the air between us, plain, direct, and loaded with unspoken meaning. They were not an accusation. They were a field report, a statement of fact from one professional to another. His face remained a mask of military composure, but I saw it in his eyes. The instant understanding, the dawning comprehension of the enormous implications behind that simple sentence. He knew who I was now. He remembered the captain from Fallujah, the one who saw the geometry of the battlefield. And he knew with the certainty of a commander who trusts his intelligence that I would not have approached him unless I was absolutely sure. He knew I had proof. General Thompson didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. A man of his experience doesn't react. He processes. For a long, silent moment, he just looked at me, his gaze intense, analytical. He was no longer seeing a wedding guest in a simple blue dress. He was seeing Captain Garrison. He was seeing a credible source. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. Message received. At that exact moment, I saw a flash of crimson in my peripheral vision. It was Chloe gliding towards us, her smile bright and brittle. Harrison, her new husband, was a step behind her. She had seen me talking to the general for too long. She was coming to run interference to manage the naive sister before I could embarrass her. Maya, darling, what are you doing all the way over here? Chloe's voice was light musical, but I could hear the steel underneath it. I hope my sister isn't boring you with stories from her little NGO general. She placed a proprietary hand on the general's arm, a gesture meant to reclaim him, to pull him back into her world. Not at all. General Thompson said, his voice perfectly calm. Your sister was just enlightening me. He turned his head slightly and his eyes met Chloe's. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her, a long, unblinking stare. And in that moment, Chloe's practiced perfect smile began to crumble at the edges. She saw something in his face. A shift. A sudden, chilling seriousness that had not been there moments before. She looked from his face to mine, her eyes widening with a flicker of dawning horrified comprehension. She knew I had done something. The mask of the loving, condescending sister fell away, replaced by a raw, naked panic. Before she could say a word, the general spoke again, his voice still quiet, but now imbued with an unmistakable tone of command. Captain Garrison, he said, using my former rank, a deliberate choice that echoed through the space between us. I believe you have a full report for me. My full report is on a secure drive, General. Ready for your review? I replied, my own voice steady. He nodded again. Good. He then turned to a man in a dark suit who had been standing discreetly nearby a man I instantly recognized as his aide-de-camp. Major, he said, please escort Ms. Garrison to my car. Secure any materials she gives you and wait for my instructions. The major stepped forward immediately. Yes, sir. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute, but the atmosphere around us had changed completely. Guests nearby, sensing the sudden shift in tone, began to quiet their conversations, their curious gazes turning toward us. Chloe stood frozen, her hand still on the general's arm, her face a mask of disbelief. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect, flawless day was beginning to fracture right before her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to regain control, but no words came out. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile beneath the glittering chandeliers. She was no longer the queen of the ball. She was just a woman who had been caught in her own lie, and the unraveling had just begun. The major, the general's aide, gave me a curt professional nod. Ma'am, if you'll come with me. I turned to follow him, but not before I glanced back at Chloe one last time. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. The triumphant bride was gone, replaced by a terrified woman who could see the walls of her castle crumbling around her. Her new husband, Harrison, looked utterly bewildered, glancing between his wife, his father, and the general, unable to comprehend the sudden catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. As the major escorted me toward the ballroom exit, a low, urgent murmur began to ripple through the crowd. The guests knew something was wrong. The string quartet faltered, playing a few discordant notes before falling silent altogether. The air, once filled with laughter and music, was now thick with a heavy, anxious tension. We had just reached the grand, ornate doors of the ballroom when they were pushed open from the outside. But it wasn't a late-arriving guest or a hotel staff member. It was 4 men. They were dressed in dark conservative suits, but they moved with a purpose and coordination that had nothing to do with high society. They were federal agents. Their faces were grim, their eyes scanning the room with a practiced, sweeping gaze that missed nothing. They walked with the quiet, confident authority of men who do not need to raise their voices to be obeyed. The lead agent, a tall man with graying temples, walked directly toward the head table. The crowd parted for him as if he were Moses parting the Red Sea. He didn't look at the bride or the groom. His focus was entirely on the patriarch. Mr. Devereaux, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that silenced the entire room. I'm Special Agent Thorne with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was a sound of hundreds of people realizing they were no longer at a wedding reception. They were witnesses to the spectacular downfall of an empire. Mr. Devereaux's face, which had been a mask of confusion, hardened into a scowl. On what grounds? This is preposterous. This is my son's wedding. For conspiracy, wire fraud, and the trafficking of controlled military articles under the Arms Export Control Act, Agent Thorne recited, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Another agent stepped forward and placed Mr. Devereaux's hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs being locked echoed through the cavernous, silent room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Harrison the groom lunged forward. You can't do this! There's been a mistake! 2 more agents intercepted him, their movements swift and efficient. At the same time, others began to quietly approach Mr. Devereaux's known business associates in the room. The celebration had become a coordinated, multi-target takedown. From my position by the door, I watched it all unfold. I saw Chloe finally crumble, her hands flying to her mouth, a choked, guttural sob escaping her lips. Her perfect day, her perfect life had just been publicly and irrevocably dismantled. The foundation of her world, built on a bedrock of lies and ambition, had just been turned to dust. And all it took was 5 quiet words spoken in truth. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the wreckage. I had already given my statement and the encrypted drive to the general's aide. My part in the operation was over. As the FBI began to systematically dismantle the Devereaux's world inside the ballroom, I slipped out a side exit and into the cool New York night. I walked for blocks, letting the city's anonymity swallow me whole. There was no sense of triumph, no elation. There was only the profound quiet calm that comes after a long and difficult mission is finally complete. The story broke the next morning, an explosion across every news channel. Shipping magnate arrested in arms trafficking scandal. Society wedding raided by FBI. The headlines were sensational, feeding on the dramatic intersection of wealth crime and a high society wedding gone wrong. The Devereaux name, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now synonymous with treason. The media, of course, got parts of the story wrong. They speculated about a mysterious informant, a rival corporation, a deal gone bad. My name was never mentioned. I was a ghost, just as I had always been. And that was exactly how I wanted it. A few weeks later, life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. I was back in my office at True North Aid, surrounded by the comforting chaos of logistics and planning. We were organizing a massive shipment of emergency shelters to a region in Central America that had just been devastated by a hurricane. It was difficult, demanding work. It was real. One afternoon, my assistant told me I had a call on my private line. It was General Thompson. "Maya," he said, his voice warm and direct, no longer needing the formality of French. "I'm calling to offer my official and personal thanks. The data you provided was the final piece of a puzzle we've been trying to solve for years. You didn't just stop one shipment. You dismantled an entire network that was fueling conflicts in 3 different continents." "I appreciate that, General," I said simply. He continued, "But that's not the only reason I'm calling. There's a position opening up at the Pentagon, Deputy Director of Logistical Strategy for Transcom. It's a civilian post. It requires someone who sees the whole board, someone who understands how to move assets quietly and effectively. It requires someone like you. The job is yours if you want it." I listened to his offer, a wave of something I hadn't expected washing over me. It was validation. The ultimate professional acknowledgement from a man I respected more than almost anyone. The world I had been forced out of was now inviting me back, not just as a player, but as a leader. For a moment, I considered it. I saw the life it offered, the power to make real systemic change from the inside. But then I looked around my office. I saw the maps on the wall marked with locations of floods, famines, and earthquakes. I saw the faces of my team, young, tired, but dedicated people who believed in our mission. "Thank you, General. I'm truly honored," I said, and I meant it. "But I think I'm already where I belong. My skills are needed here." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then he chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "I figured you'd say that," he said. "But the offer stands. Always. You did the right thing, Maya. You served your country again in your own way." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. I looked out the window, a sense of peace settling over me. I didn't need a title or a post at the Pentagon to know my worth. My work wasn't a little world. It was the whole world. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. In the weeks that followed the raid and the phone call from General Thompson, a quiet normalcy returned to my life. The news cycle moved on to other scandals, and the name Devereaux faded from the headlines, relegated to the dry legal proceedings that would drag on for years. I never heard from Chloe directly. There were no angry phone calls, no desperate messages. There was only a profound and deafening silence, a silence that spoke more loudly than any words could. Her world had been incinerated, and I was the one who had struck the match. There was nothing left to say. One rainy Saturday afternoon, as I was cleaning out an old closet, I came across a dusty photo album. I flipped through the stiff yellowed pages, my fingers tracing the smiling faces of 2 little girls with matching haircuts and missing front teeth. One of them was me. The other was Chloe. I stopped at a picture of us, aged maybe 8 and 10, sitting on the front porch steps sharing a popsicle. We looked happy. We looked like sisters. A wave of grief, not for the woman Chloe had become, but for the little girl she had been, washed over me. I thought about the fork in the road where our lives had diverged so completely. When had she started to measure the world in dollars and status? When had she started to see my life not as different, but as lesser? When had the trust between us become just another asset for her to leverage? I knew I would never have the answers. I sat down at my small desk, the one that usually held maps and manifests, and pulled out a single sheet of plain stationery. I began to write. I didn't write about the wedding or the FBI or the smuggled weapons. I didn't write about her betrayal. The letter wasn't for the woman who had stood in that ballroom. It was for the little girl on the porch steps. I wrote about the blanket forts we used to build, how she always insisted on having the royal entrance. I wrote about the time I fell and scraped my knee, and how she had run to get a bandage, her face a mask of fierce protective concern. I wrote about the shared secrets, the late-night giggles, the simple, uncomplicated bond that had once existed between us. My pen moved across the page, not with anger or accusation, but with a quiet, aching sadness. It was a letter of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what we had lost. Acknowledgement that the person I was writing to no longer existed. It was a eulogy for a sisterhood that had died long before that wedding day. When I was finished, I read the letter once. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into an envelope. I wrote her name Chloe on the front in simple block letters. For a long moment, I thought about sending it. I thought about what it might mean to her if it would mean anything at all. But then I understood. The letter wasn't for her. It was for me. It was my way of closing the door. It was my way of separating the memory of the past from the reality of the present. It was my final act of logistical sorting, putting a painful piece of my history into its proper place. I walked over to a small wooden box on my bookshelf where I kept old keepsakes. The brass challenge coin from my unit, a faded map from my first deployment, a few cherished letters from my parents. I placed the sealed unsent letter inside and closed the lid. It was over. I had said my goodbyes. And in the quiet of my apartment with the rain streaking down the window pane, I finally felt a sense of peace. I was free. Months later, the autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the first hint of winter. I was standing on a busy pier in Baltimore, the salty wind whipping strands of hair across my face. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue. Below me, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal echoed as a massive crane lifted a bright blue shipping container high into the air. On its side, the words True North Aid were painted in bold white letters. The container swayed for a moment against the vast expanse of the sky before being lowered gently into the cargo hold of a waiting ship. It was filled with thermal blankets, emergency medical kits, and high-energy food rations destined for a remote mountain community in the Andes that was about to be cut off by winter snows. It was one of a dozen such containers leaving today. It was a good day. One of our new volunteers, a bright-eyed young woman fresh out of college named Sarah, came to stand beside me. She watched the container disappear into the ship, her expression a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "I still can't believe we pulled this off," she said. 3 weeks ago, this was just a request on a spreadsheet. Now, it's real. It's on its way. She turned to me, her eyes shining with genuine curiosity. "Can I ask you something, Maya?" "Of course," I said, my gaze still on the ship. "You were in the army, right? A decorated officer. You could have been a general by now. You could have a cushy job in Washington. Do you ever regret leaving all that behind for this?" She gestured vaguely at the noisy, chaotic pier, the grinding machinery, the hard, unglamorous work. I thought about her question for a long moment. I thought about the offer from General Thompson, the gleaming office in the Pentagon, the life of influence and power I could have had. I thought about the velvet invitations and the crystal glasses and the polite, empty conversations. And then I thought about the feel of the challenge coin in my pocket, the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed, the knowledge that this container, this simple blue box, would keep a family warm through a blizzard. It would save a life, maybe many. "I never left the service, Sarah," I said, turning to look at her, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a very long time. "I just changed the cargo. My mission used to be about supplying soldiers for a war. Now it's about supplying hope for humanity. It's a different battlefield, but the mission is the same. It's about getting the right things to the right people at the right time, no matter what." She nodded slowly, a look of understanding dawning on her face. I looked back out at the ocean, at the ship preparing to carry its precious cargo across the world. I was not a society figure. I was not a high-powered executive. I was not the woman my sister had tried to make me. I was a logistician, a planner, a woman who understood that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but about the impact you leave behind. The wind felt clean, the sky felt open, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly pointing in the direction of my own true north. Thank you so much for joining us for Maya's story. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest vindication isn't loud or flashy. It's the quiet, steady confidence of knowing your own worth, even when the world or even your own family tries to tell you otherwise. True strength is often found not in winning the argument, but in the integrity of your work and the truth of your actions. We'd love to know what this story made you feel. Where are you listening from today? Is it a quiet morning, a busy commute, or a late night where stories like this feel like a friend? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if Maya's journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. It helps us so much and ensures you won't miss the next story. Until then, take care and remember that your value is never defined by someone else's opinion. We'll see you next time.